My daughter-in-law threw my pill bottle outside and shut the door behind me, saying, "If you are that sick, go live in a hospital." I was barely holding on, but I drove myself to the ER. 2 weeks later, she was the one who stayed homeless. It didn't start like this. A year ago, when I moved in with my son David and his wife Melissa, I told myself it was temporary. I had just come home from a triple bypass surgery, and living alone wasn't an option then. The doctors said I needed help, someone around in case anything went wrong. David had insisted it was the right thing, that I'd be safe with them. But Melissa was never thrilled about it. She didn't say much in the beginning, just forced smiles and tight nods. I thought I could manage that. I didn't want to be a burden. I kept to myself, helped with dishes when I could stand long enough, folded laundry sitting down, and stayed mostly in the guest bedroom, which was really a storage room with a bed, pushed against the wall. Hold on a moment before we move forward. Let us know where in the world you're watching from. And if you're loving these stories, don't forget to hit subscribe. Tomorrow's episode is going to be absolutely mind-blowing. At first, I tried to stay grateful, even when Melissa slammed drawers louder than necessary, or when she sighed. Whenever I asked for help with small things, like opening the pill bottles that arthritis made impossible. I told myself it was stress, that caring for an elderly woman was hard for anyone. Maybe it was. But things changed fast. It was a Tuesday morning. I'd had a bad night. The kind where your chest feels tight and your hands go numb, and the fear crawls up your back like ice water. I took my nitroglycerin like the doctor taught me and waited. It passed. But the next morning, when I asked Melissa if she could pick up my prescriptions after work, her expression hardened. "Again?" "I just went last week," she said, pouring her coffee. "These things cost a fortune. How many pills does a person need to survive?" "They're heart meds," I said carefully, keeping my tone low. "The doctor said—" "I know what the doctor said. I'm the one who had to sit in that hospital room while they explained it." "Don't talk to me like I don't know," she snapped. I didn't answer. I lowered my eyes and tried not to shake. The room went quiet except for the sound of her stirring. The sugar. A minute later, David came in, kissed her cheek, asked if she wanted anything from the gas station. Not once did he ask how I was feeling that morning. That day, I waited until he got home to ask again about the prescriptions. Melissa stayed in the kitchen while I approached David. He rubbed his temples, tired from work, and said, "Can it wait a day or two? Melissa's been picking them up every time, Mom. Maybe we can space it out a little." I nodded. What else was I going to say? That night, my chest hurt again. Not enough to go to the ER, but bad enough that I sat awake in bed with the lights off, listening to the silence of the house and feeling like I didn't belong in it. I missed my husband. He'd died 5 years ago. He would have fought for me. But I had no fight left in me. The incident with the pill bottle happened 3 days later. Melissa was cleaning the kitchen, slamming cabinet doors harder than necessary, when I walked in holding the bottle. It was nearly empty. "I'm sorry." "To ask again," I said softly. "But I need these. I'm getting dizzy and—" She turned around with a glare. "You're always dizzy, aren't you? Always something wrong. You know what? If you're that sick—" She snatched the bottle from my hand, walked to the front door, opened it, and hurled it into the yard. "Go live in a hospital." Then she shut the door behind me. The sound of that lock clicking still echoes in my head. I stood there on the porch, wearing an old sweater over my nightgown, shaking so bad I could barely bend to pick the bottle off the grass. The lid had popped off and some pills spilled into the dirt. I gathered what I could and went back to the driveway, tears stinging my eyes from embarrassment, not sadness. A neighbor across the street watched, but didn't say anything. He just turned around and walked back into his garage. I climbed into my car and sat for a long time. I didn't know where to go. I couldn't think clearly. All I knew was that I was scared to die on that porch, so I drove myself to the emergency room. It's a miracle I made it. My vision blurred twice on the way there. By the time I reached the hospital, I was slumped over the steering wheel, heart pounding in a rhythm that didn't feel right. The nurse said my blood pressure was 197 over 120. I spent the next 3 days in the cardiac ward. Not once did David or Melissa call. No visits, no messages. The nurse asked if I had family to notify. I gave her David's number. She tried twice, then stopped. She didn't say what was said. On the other end, I didn't ask. On the 4th day, the cardiologist came in and said the words I already expected. If you hadn't come in when you did, you likely would have had another heart attack. A bad one. I nodded. That was all I could do. When I was discharged, I didn't go back to David's house. I couldn't. I didn't even tell them I was out. Instead, I went to the only place I could think of that wouldn't ask questions or try to guilt me for existing. The church I used to volunteer at before the surgery. Pastor Janine didn't hesitate. She brought out a cot, blankets, and gave me access to the break room. "Stay here tonight," she said. "Tomorrow we'll figure out something more permanent." I didn't know how to thank her. I still don't. By the end of the week, she'd found a temporary placement for me in a shared senior housing apartment connected to a local nonprofit. Small, but clean. 1 bedroom. My name was on the lease. I hadn't had that in years, and for the first time in months, no one sighed at me for existing. A week later, while I was helping a woman at the housing center organize pantry donations, I got a phone call from an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but I did. It was Melissa. Her voice was rushed, tense. "Where are you?" I paused. "Why?" She exhaled like she'd been holding it in for hours. "We need to talk. The house, it's gone. The landlord, he said your name is still on the title." I blinked. "Excuse me? Can you just meet us?" David didn't know. He thought, "Can you just, please?" I hung up. It was the first time I felt the warmth of control in my chest since the bypass. They had tried to discard me like a used tissue. But they forgot who owned the paper. I stared at the screen after the call ended. Melissa's name was still glowing at the top. I put the phone down on the little plastic side table next to the bed and sat there, not moving. Not out of shock, not even out of anger. I just sat with it. The silence in that tiny senior housing room felt cleaner than anything I'd known in that house with David and Melissa. There was no tension in the air, no noise of someone sighing dramatically, no footsteps pacing in the hallway waiting for me to move out of their way. Just quiet. Melissa had said the house was gone. That wasn't possible, or at least I thought it wasn't. I hadn't seen the paperwork in years. David handled most of the transfer details when I moved in with them, but back when George, my husband, was still alive, we had the house refinanced in our names and eventually added David to the deed. At least that's what I believed had happened. Now, Melissa was calling me in a panic. She never called me, not even when I was in the hospital. And now that something had gone wrong, suddenly I was important again. I got up slowly and opened the drawer of the nightstand. Inside were the papers Pastor Janine had helped me gather during my first week there. Social Security statements, Medicare, files, my hospital discharge summary, and a few old folders that I'd managed to bring with me when I left David's house. Most of them were medical, but one was thicker, labeled in George's handwriting, House, Deed, and Insurance. I pulled it out and sat back down. I hadn't looked at it in years. When you trust your family, you don't feel the need to double-check. I flipped through the pages. There was the original deed from 1992, with both our names. The refinance. Documents from 2005. And then, at the very back, a notarized copy from 2011, transferring the property into my name only. George had removed his name when his health declined. He wanted it simple, clean. And David's name. It wasn't there. I blinked. I flipped the page over again, checked the margins, looked for attachments. Nothing. It was just my name, in bold, clear as day. I held the document in my lap and let the full weight of that hit me. I still owned the house. My hands started to shake, not out of fear, but out of something that felt dangerously close to clarity. All this time, they thought they had full control. They thought I was just the old woman in the corner room, a guest, a burden. But I had never stopped being the owner of that house. Knock on my door pulled me out of it. It was Gloria, one of the residents in the apartment next door. She had a bag of apples in one hand and a small folding stool in the other. "Still coming to help with the pantry?" she asked, smiling. "Yes," I said, standing. "Give me 5 minutes. I didn't mention the call. I didn't mention the house. Not yet." But that night, after dinner, I called a name I hadn't spoken in years. Roger Lawson, my late husband's old friend. He used to be our accountant. After George passed, I lost touch with him. I found his number in an old address book I kept. In the drawer. It took 3 tries before I reached him. "Hello?" His voice was rough but unmistakable. "Roger, this is Margaret Sullivan." A pause. "Margaret," he said slowly. "My God, it's been what? 10 years?" "More or less," I said. "I need a favor. I need to understand something about the house." I explained everything. From the move-in, to the hospital, to the pill bottle, to the phone call from Melissa. He didn't interrupt. When I was done, he cleared his throat. "If you've got the 2011 transfer showing your name only, and there's no signed quitclaim deed transferring it to David, then legally, you still own the property," he said. "You never filed anything to remove yourself, right?" "No," I said. "Then they've been living there on your generosity, Margaret. Nothing else." I took a breath. "Can you meet me?" I asked. "I'll bring everything I can find," he replied. "You deserve to know exactly what you have." 2 days later, Roger came to the apartment. He'd aged, of course. He had a cane now, and his gray hair was nearly white. But his eyes were sharp as ever. He sat at my kitchen table and spread out a folder with more papers than I expected. He'd kept copies of our old financial files all these years. "David never filed a transfer," he said, showing me a printout from the county's property record system. "Your name is still the legal owner. The tax records, insurance documents, and property title, everything points to you." I sat back in the chair. My hands felt cold. Roger continued. "I also looked into the recent mortgage payments. They stopped 2 months ago. That's likely why they got the eviction notice. The house is being foreclosed." I blinked. "But I didn't stop any payments. I haven't touched that account since George passed." "Because David refinanced it behind your back," Roger said. "But he couldn't legally do that unless he forged your signature or had a power of attorney. You never revoked." I felt the weight of that word, forged. "Can we prove that?" I asked. "If I compare your known signatures to the refinancing documents, and they don't match?" "Then yes," he said. "But either way, the bank's action doesn't cancel out your title. You still own it, even if it's in default." I nodded slowly. Roger gathered everything and placed it back in his briefcase. "Do you want to take action?" I didn't answer right away. I looked out the window. The apartment overlooked a narrow alley, and there wasn't much to see. But it was mine. I had a key to this place. A bed no one could throw me out of. A chair where no one rolled their eyes if I took too long to sit. "I want them out," I said finally. Roger nodded. "You're within your rights. We'll start with a cease and desist. Then we file for possession." That night, I slept better than I had in years. The next morning, Melissa called again. I let it ring. Then David called. I let that one ring. 2. By the 3rd day, they were texting. Long blocks of messages filled with questions, then accusations, then pleads. Melissa claimed it was all a misunderstanding. David begged me to respond, said they were about to lose everything. I didn't respond. A week later, I received a letter. It was from a legal aid office. Melissa had applied for emergency housing. In the letter, she listed me as a non-communicative relative and previous co-resident. She claimed elder abandonment and requested state mediation. I brought it to Roger. "She listed you as abandoning her?" he asked, eyebrows raised. I handed it to him without a word. "I'll handle it," he said. "Let them try. The next court hearing would decide everything." As I sat waiting outside the small claims courtroom a few weeks later, I saw David for the first time since I left their house. He looked thinner, nervous. Melissa stood beside him wearing a too-tight blazer and chewing on the side of her cheek. She spotted me and looked away. David didn't say anything. He just looked down at the floor. The judge called us in. Roger stood tall beside me, folder in hand. Melissa's lawyer was young and overwhelmed. By the time Roger finished presenting the deed, the signature analysis, and the financial trail, showing Melissa's mismanagement of house payments, the judge barely had questions. 10 minutes later, the ruling came down. Full possession returned to me. Melissa and David had 30 days to vacate. When we walked out of the courtroom, David tried to speak. "Mom, I didn't..." I raised my hand, just enough to stop him. "I needed you once," I said, keeping my voice calm. "You both shut the door." Melissa didn't look at me. She kept walking. David stayed behind, eyes damp, mouth open, but no words came out. I walked past him. Back at my apartment, I opened the window and let the breeze in. For the first time in a long time, I felt steady. They thought they owned me. They forgot who signed the deed. After the court hearing, the 30-day countdown started. David and Melissa had a month to leave the property, and the court order made it official. I didn't celebrate. There wasn't any sense of victory, not yet. The truth was, I didn't feel anything for the first couple of days. Just a strange emptiness, like I had been holding my breath for so long that now I didn't know how to breathe normally again. Roger called that evening to make sure I understood the next steps. "They'll have to leave," he said. "If they don't, we go to enforcement. But legally, they're now trespassers after the deadline, and that means they'll be forced out. This time, you're protected." I thanked him. He didn't try to make it emotional, which I appreciated. He understood I wasn't looking for comfort. I was looking for clarity. The next morning, I got a text from David. It just said, "Please talk to me before we pack." I didn't reply. There was nothing to say. I'd said everything the day they locked me out, but that didn't stop him from trying again. 3 days later, he called. I didn't pick up. But this time, he left a voicemail. "Mom, look, I know we messed up. I know Melissa shouldn't have said what she said, and I should have handled it better. But please don't make us homeless. Just let us stay a little longer, we'll figure something out. I'm still your son." That line, "I'm still your son," stuck with me for hours after. I didn't know if it was supposed to be a plea or a threat or just an excuse. I remembered the way he used to hold my hand when he was little. I remembered the time he scraped his knee on the sidewalk and cried so loud the whole block came out to check. I remembered staying up all night sewing a costume for his 5th-grade play because he forgot to tell me about it until the night before. I remembered the way he clung to my sleeve at George's funeral, trying to look strong but shaking all over. And I remembered the way he looked the other direction while Melissa shoved me out the door. I didn't reply to the voicemail either. Instead, I started preparing. Roger helped me draft the formal possession letter. We mailed it by certified post and hand-delivered a copy to the house. I didn't go myself. Roger sent a courier. I couldn't bring myself to see that house again. Not yet. I focused on what I could control. The senior housing complex was calm, and the routine kept me centered. In the mornings, I helped organize the community pantry. In the afternoons, I started volunteering with Gloria at the knitting table, even though I hadn't held a pair of needles in years. The women there didn't ask many questions about my situation. They just made room for me. After a week, I got a letter from the bank. Roger had warned me it was coming. The mortgage David refinanced was deeply behind. They had stopped paying 3 months earlier. The house was scheduled for foreclosure, but the process could be stopped because the house was still legally mine, and I hadn't signed any of the documents authorizing that new mortgage. Technically, the loan wasn't valid. Roger prepared a response letter with the deed and our court ruling attached. He also filed a fraud report on my behalf. The bank would likely try to settle quietly, especially once they realized how weak their case was. Meanwhile, Melissa sent another message. This time it was longer. I don't expect you to forgive me. I know what I said was cruel, but we're both out of work now. We don't have savings. I thought I was helping David by managing things. I thought you were just in the way. I was wrong. Please don't let us lose everything. She attached a photo. It was the two of them sitting on the porch, the same porch she once pushed me off of. This time, I didn't ignore it. I forwarded it to Roger. He wrote back in less than an hour. I'll draft a neutral reply. We acknowledge the message but don't negotiate. You have nothing to apologize for. The final 2 weeks passed slowly. Every day felt longer than the one before it. On day 23, I woke up to a knock at the community center entrance. It was the front desk volunteer holding a small envelope. "Someone dropped this off for you," she said. There was no name, just my first name on the front in rushed handwriting. Inside, a folded letter from David. "Mom, we're leaving at the end of the month. I didn't want to fight you. I just wanted to say I'm sorry. Melissa and we were trying to hold things together. I know now how badly we handled everything, especially that day. I wish I could take it back. I wish I had opened the door instead of pretending I didn't. Hear you. I hope one day you'll want to speak to me again." David. I held the paper for a while. Then I folded it back into the envelope and placed it in the drawer next to George's folder. On the 30th day, Roger called to confirm they were gone. "I had someone drive by. The house is empty. They left the keys with the sheriff's office," he said. I didn't respond immediately. Roger added, "You can go back any time. The house is yours again." I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. That night I didn't sleep much. I sat in the chair near the window thinking about that house. Not the furniture or the layout, but what it meant. I had moved in there in 1992. George and I had worked 2 jobs each to afford the down payment. We painted every room by hand. We fixed pipes ourselves. That kitchen saw more birthdays, Thanksgivings, and morning coffee conversations than any other place I'd ever known. And for a while, it had felt like it stopped being mine. Now, it was waiting for me. The next morning, I got dressed and took the bus across town. I hadn't been back there in nearly 4 months. My chest tightened as we turned onto the familiar street. When the house came into view, I almost didn't recognize it. The lawn was overgrown. The mailbox hung sideways off its post. The blinds were bent, but the bones were the same. I stepped off the bus, walked to the porch, and stared at the door. Roger had arranged for the locks to be changed that afternoon. I still had the master key from the past, but now, this one felt different. The door opened with a quiet creak. The air inside was stale, but the silence was mine again. I walked through each room slowly. My footsteps echoed slightly off the hardwood floors. There were a few scuffs on the walls, and the place needed a deep clean, but I didn't care. I stood in the kitchen the longest. This was where George used to sit, reading the paper. This was where David had eaten cereal in his pajamas. This was where Melissa told me there wasn't enough space for my medicine. I pulled out a chair and sat at the table, the same spot I used to sit every morning with my tea. I didn't cry. I didn't smile either. I just sat there, hands resting on the table, and let the stillness settle. The house was mine again, not because a judge said so, but because I never gave it away. The first thing I did the day after reclaiming the house was open every single window. I didn't care how cold the wind was or how long it took for the air to circulate. The smell of damp carpet and stale food reminded me of what had happened here, what they let happen. I left the front door wide open too, sat on the steps, and just breathed. That porch used to be a place where I read magazines on Sunday mornings, where I watched David learn how to ride a bike. Now it was where Melissa had tossed my medication like it was trash. But I wasn't going to let that memory define the space. I spent the morning walking through every room with a notebook and pen. The living room smelled like old takeout. The bathroom needed scrubbing. The spare bedroom, the one I had been confined to when I lived here, was bare. No bed, no curtains. They must have taken everything they could carry. Fine by me. I didn't want a single item they'd left behind. In the kitchen, I found half-empty spice jars, crumbs in the drawers, a broken toaster, and a sticky spot near the sink that I didn't want to investigate too closely. I didn't get angry. I didn't cry. I just made a list. Trash bags, gloves, vinegar, scrub brushes, a new lock for the backyard gate. It wasn't about revenge. It was about taking back control. That afternoon, I walked to the corner store. The man behind the register, Rick, used to know George. He blinked when he saw me, then smiled slowly. "Mrs. Sullivan," he said. "It's been a while." "Almost a year," I replied. "I'm back in the house now." His eyebrows rose. "Good. I was wondering when that would happen. Heard a lot of shouting from that place for months. Thought you'd sold it." I shook my head. Never did. He bagged the supplies carefully and added a pack of sponges for free. "Welcome. Back," he said. That evening, I started with the spare room. It was where they made me feel like I didn't belong, so it became my first project. I scrubbed the walls, vacuumed the floor, opened the closet, and threw out everything. There were empty shoe boxes, a cracked mirror, and a broken lamp missing its shade. I tossed them all. Then I stood in the center of the room and took a deep breath. This wasn't a prison anymore. It was a blank slate. The next day, I hired a cleaning service. 3 women arrived at 9 a.m., all middle-aged and efficient. They didn't ask questions, just took the list I handed them and got to work. One of them, Rosa, nodded toward the old family photo hanging crooked above the fireplace. "You want this cleaned or taken down?" I looked at it. It was from 10 years ago. George, me, David, and Melissa. We were all smiling, but I remembered that day vividly. Melissa had been cold to me all morning. She didn't want to take the photo. She only agreed after David insisted. The smiles were forced. "Take it down," I said. "Wrap it carefully. I'm not throwing it out. Just don't want it up anymore." She nodded and set it aside. By lunchtime, the house smelled like lemon and soap. The carpets had been shampooed. The bathroom tiles sparkled. The kitchen was usable again, but I wasn't done. I called Roger that afternoon. "I want to talk about the mortgage fraud," I said. He didn't sound surprised. "We'll need to get the bank's internal documentation. If David used your name or forged your signature to secure that refinance, we have a case." "Then let's do it," I replied. I wasn't doing it to punish David. I wasn't doing it for the money. I just wanted the record corrected. I didn't want my name tied to anything shady. I had lived too carefully for too long to let someone else smear my history out of desperation. That night, I slept in the main bedroom again. George's side of the bed was empty, but it had been for years. What was different now was that I didn't feel unwelcome in my own home. I left the hallway light on, not because I was afraid, but because I wanted to see clearly if I had to get up in the middle of the night. Clarity mattered to me now more than ever. 3 days later, Roger called again. The bank's legal department responded, he said. We sent them copies of your signature and the title documents. They admitted there were discrepancies. They're offering to settle, quietly, no court. How much? They want to avoid litigation, so they're offering full release of liability, plus $18,000 in compensation for any damages and costs you incurred. I blinked. That quick? They're not stupid. They know they could be in real trouble. If a judge looks at this, they didn't verify the identity on the refinance. That's on them. I paused. And David. They're not going after him, but the fraud report will stay in the bank's internal files. If he ever tries to take out a loan again, it'll be flagged. I said yes. 2 weeks later, the funds were transferred. Roger had them go directly into a new account he helped me open, one with only my name on it. I bought a new mattress, a proper one, soft but firm. Then I bought myself a new tea kettle, red, enamel-coated, the kind that whistles when it's ready. Then I hired a locksmith to rekey every lock on the property, including the mailbox. I was standing by the front gate, holding the new key in my hand, when I saw a car parked across the street. It was David's. He was sitting behind the wheel, alone, not trying to hide, just watching. I didn't walk over. He didn't wave. He stayed there a few minutes longer, then drove off. I didn't feel fear. I didn't feel anger. What I felt was something I couldn't quite name, something quiet and deep. It wasn't joy. It wasn't revenge. It was peace. Back inside, I started going through the boxes Melissa had left in the garage. Most of it was junk. Some of it was mine, Tupperware, a few of George's old sweaters, even a tin full of recipes I thought I'd lost. I kept what mattered, burned the rest in the fireplace. That night, I sat in the kitchen with a cup of tea. The new kettle made a low whistle that filled the room. I liked that sound. I liked that I could hear it now. No one was shouting over it. No one was telling me I didn't belong. The next day, I bought a pack of note cards. I wrote a letter to the community center where I had been staying, thanking them. I donated half the money from the bank settlement to help other women who might end up in my situation. I asked them to use it for emergency housing, legal referrals, and transportation. They wrote back 2 days later. The director signed it herself. Your story reminded us why we do this. It wasn't over. I still had work to do. But for the first time in years, I was doing that work on my own terms. About a week after settling things with the bank, I started going back to my old routines. I got up early, made breakfast without rushing, and read the newspaper cover to cover like I used to when George was alive. I even went out into the backyard, what was left of it. The garden I used to keep was gone, replaced by dirt patches and cigarette butts. The flower beds were dried up. But I made a note to fix them. I wasn't in a hurry. I had time now. I spent the next few days reorganizing the kitchen. I threw out old plastic containers, scrubbed the shelves, replaced the drawer liners. I bought a few ceramic bowls and glass jars, just enough to make the cabinets feel mine again. There was comfort in that. Quiet, steady work. It was during one of those afternoons that I heard the knock, not the front door, the side gate. 3 soft taps, followed by silence. I froze. No one used that gate. Ever. I walked slowly to the side window and peeked out. It was David. He wasn't holding anything. No bags, no paperwork, just standing there in a wrinkled button-up shirt and jeans that hung a little loose around his waist. He looked tired, paler than I remembered, older. I hesitated, but then opened the side door and stepped out. He looked up as soon as he heard the door. "Hi," he said. I didn't answer at first. I just looked at him. "I know I'm not supposed to be here," he continued, but I didn't know where else to go. "What do you want, David?" I asked. Calm, clear. He scratched his head. I don't even know anymore. I've been sleeping in my car for 3 days. Melissa's with her sister upstate. We're not really speaking. I said nothing. He looked down at the ground, kicked a loose rock with the side of his shoe. I wasn't calling to manipulate you. I wasn't trying to take the house. I didn't even look at the deed, Mom. I just assumed you assumed wrong, I said. And you let her throw me out. He nodded slowly. I know. You heard the door lock behind me. I know. You didn't open it. He looked up again. I thought I was protecting her. I folded my arms. And who was protecting? Me? He didn't have an answer. I let the silence stretch. Finally, he said, I don't expect anything. I'm not asking to come back. I guess I needed to see you. I needed to say I'm sorry in person. Is that all? He looked down again. I don't know. I didn't move. Didn't invite him in. I just waited. After a while, he looked back at me. She always had a way of getting under my skin. Melissa. She knew how to push. And I let her make the rules. I thought I was keeping things peaceful, but I was just giving her all the control. I didn't even realize what I was doing to you until it was too late. I didn't say what I was thinking, that it hadn't been too late when I was standing on the porch, shaking, holding my spilled pills in my hands. He continued. The day after we left, I started thinking about everything. About the dinners we had here when I was a kid. About the mornings you used to iron my shirts for school. About the way you sat by Dad's side all the way through the chemo. And then I thought about how I let someone speak to you like you were nothing. I hate myself for that. I didn't soften. I didn't need to. You should have thought of that earlier, I said. He nodded again. I know. There was another long pause. Then he looked up and added, Melissa's pregnant. That hit harder than I expected. Not because I felt joy, not because I was excited to be a grandmother again, but because of the way he said it, flat, tired, unsure. We found out right before the court hearing, he said. I didn't tell you because I don't know what I thought. That maybe if I didn't say anything, you wouldn't feel guilty kicking us out. I didn't kick you out, I said. You were never supposed to be there. That house was mine the whole time. He nodded. I get it. She called me a burden. She told me to go live in a hospital. And you stood there. I know. There. Was nothing else to say. Not right then. After a minute, I stepped back. I'm not letting you in, David. I'm not ready for that. I didn't ask to come in, he replied. I believed him. I have an appointment with a counselor. He added, through the shelter program. They said it might help. I nodded once. Good. He looked at me for a second longer, then said, I'll go. I didn't stop him. As he turned to leave, I said one last thing. Don't name the baby after me. He froze, then slowly turned back. I wasn't going to, he said. But the way he said it, there was no malice, just understanding. He left. That night, I sat in the living room and stared at the empty fireplace. It was strange, seeing him like that, broken, humbled. It wasn't what I had wanted. I didn't fantasize about him suffering. I never needed revenge. I needed distance. I needed peace. And now that I had it, I could feel something shifting. Not forgiveness, not yet, but a loosening in my chest. I went to the spare bedroom, my old room, and opened the closet. Inside was a stack of papers I hadn't touched yet. Among them, a letter from George that I had never finished reading. He had written it months before he died, and at the time, it was too painful to get through. Now, I sat on the edge of the bed and unfolded the paper. Margaret, if you're reading this, it means I'm either gone or getting close. I want you to know something. You're stronger than you think. You always have been. I see the way you carry this family. I see how you take the hits, stay quiet, hold things together. When I'm gone, don't let anyone confuse your kindness with weakness. You are the backbone. You are the house. And if the day comes that someone tries to push you out of your own life, I hope you remember this. You belong. I folded the letter and placed it back in the drawer. The next morning, I called a local landscaper to come fix up the yard. I asked for garden beds along the fence line and a patch in the center for vegetables. Nothing fancy, just something to care for. Later that week, I received another envelope from the shelter. Inside was a simple update. David had enrolled in a job placement program and completed 2 counseling sessions. Melissa had joined a prenatal support group. I folded the letter and placed it next to the one from George. Not for sentimentality. Just for record keeping. 2 months passed. The garden took shape faster than I expected. The landscaper I hired, a young woman named Kayla, brought in 2 assistants who worked hard and didn't waste time. They cleared the yard, installed 3 raised beds, and helped me replant the lilac bush George had once given me as an anniversary gift. For the first time in years, I could see color returning to that backyard. Color that didn't feel artificial, or forced, or meant to impress anyone. It was just mine. I got used to sleeping through the night again. No loud footsteps down the hall. No tension behind the walls. No fear of being watched, judged, or discarded. Every morning, I walked barefoot to the kitchen, filled the red kettle, and sat at the table while it boiled. I didn't feel like a guest anymore. I didn't feel like I had to justify being alive. I felt like the woman who built this life with her own hands and watched it nearly slip away. One afternoon in early spring, I was reorganizing the hallway closet, something I hadn't touched since the eviction, when I found a small box marked in my handwriting. David. Childhood. I paused, then opened it. Inside were things I'd long forgotten. A handmade birthday card with crooked lettering, a plastic dinosaur with a missing tail, and a school photo of him with his hair sticking up in every direction. On the back, I had written, age 7, would not let me fix his hair before picture day. I stared at the picture for a long time, then slid it back in. That evening, I walked over to the community center where I used to stay. I had called ahead to schedule a short visit with the director, Nadine. She greeted me at the front with a warm smile and a firm hug. I heard the gardens coming in beautifully, she said as she led me to her office. I'll bring you a tomato when they're ripe, I replied. We sat down, and I handed her a small envelope. Inside was another check. Nothing huge, but enough to keep their housing program going for a few extra weeks. Nadine looked at it, then looked back at me. You've done more than enough already. I'm not doing it for them, I said. I'm doing it because I remember how it felt to not have a door that would open when I needed one. She nodded and said nothing else. She didn't need to. The next week, I got another envelope from the shelter. A final update, this one saying that David had completed the job placement program and found part-time work at a hardware store. Melissa was still staying with her sister, and the baby was due in 4 months. No contact requests were made. The letter just said they had moved out of the shelter system and into transitional housing. I didn't feel anything when I read it. Not sadness, not satisfaction. Just the sense that a chapter was ending. 2 days later, I received an unexpected package. No return address, but the handwriting on the label was familiar. I opened it slowly. Inside was a baby blanket. Yellow. Soft. Crocheted by hand. There was a note attached. Mom, I know you said not to name the baby after you, but I wanted you to have this. Melissa made it. She's trying. I am too. We're not asking for anything, I promise. We just wanted you to know we're okay. David, I folded the note and set it aside. I didn't respond. Not because I was angry, not because I wanted to punish them, but because that silence had become my boundary. A healthy one. 1 month later, the garden gave me its first tomato. I picked it early in the morning and washed it under the kitchen sink. The window was open. Birds were chirping. The floor tiles were warm from the sunlight. I sat at the table, sliced it carefully, and added a little salt. I took my time eating. Later that day, I packed up a box with a few things I no longer needed: the baby photo of David, the plastic dinosaur, and the yellow blanket. I didn't throw them away. I wrapped them carefully and placed them in the back of the hallway closet, behind the linens. They weren't erased, just no longer in front of me. A week after that, I held a small gathering in the backyard. Just a few neighbors from the block: Gloria from the senior center, Kayla from landscaping, and Nadine. We had lemonade and sandwiches, nothing fancy. They brought chairs and stories, and I didn't talk much. I just listened. At one point, Gloria leaned in and said, "You've been quiet. Are you all right?" I nodded. I'm exactly where I should be. That night, I walked through the house. Every light switch worked. Every room had something in it that reflected me. No one was telling me to be smaller, quieter, less visible. I paused in the hallway, hand resting on the door frame to the spare bedroom. I opened it. The walls were freshly painted. The old bed was replaced with a reading chair and a small bookshelf. On the wall hung a single framed photo: me and George, standing in front of the porch, arms around each other. That was the version of the house I wanted to remember. I closed the door gently and went to bed. I don't know what will happen with David and Melissa. I don't know if that child will ever come to my door. But I know one thing for certain: I was never the one who left. They were the ones who walked away. And I was the one who stayed, because it was always my house. And now it finally felt like my home again.